How much juice can the Atlanta Falcons expect to get out of their first round edge rusher in year one?
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of the Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of Locked On Sports Atlanta, your team every day. And if you do not know me, I'm your very humble host, Aaron Freeman, a.k.a. Mr. Drew, a.k.a. the iron that sharpens the iron, a.k.a. Mr. a.k.a. And I've been covering the Atlanta Falcons for almost 2 decades, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP. Still going strong on this illustrious podcast. Thank each and every one of you that go strong with me as everydayers. That means you make this podcast your first listen each and every day. And all you got to do to become an everydayer, subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. So today we are joined by Tre'Shon Diaz of the Falcaholic to talk about a lot of topics. So without further ado, let's jump right into it. Well, welcome back, everyone, to another illustrious episode of Locked On Falcons with an illustrious guest. He is Tre'Shon Diaz, a special teams sommelier, as he puts it, and a contributor over at the Falcaholic, the SB Nation website for the Atlanta Falcons. You can find also his work at Tre'Shon.io. Tre'Shon is going to be here with us to talk about, the Falcons definitely taking an edge rusher in round one, and what should we put those expectations on that definite first round pick going into year one. We'll talk about some of the players that Tre'Shon actually likes. So we'll actually talk positively about draft prospects on today's episode. And we'll talk about the possibility of a smokescreen with all this interest in the Falcons looking at various offensive tackles. But Tre'Shon, my friend, welcome back to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. Happy to be back. And yeah, we're going to talk positively about the first round edge that the Falcons are going to take because this is the year, Aaron.
It has to happen, right? And part of the reason why I think it has to happen is you wrote an interesting piece over at the Falcaholic earlier this week talking about the potential impact of that rookie edge rusher that definitely is going to be a first-round pick, and sort of looked at data from the last 5 years, looking at pass rushers in the first 3 rounds, their sort of averages in terms of sacks, hits, hurries, pressures, pass rush win rate in their first years in the NFL. Worthwhile read. We'll try to link that in the description below. And sort of my conclusion reading that piece that you wrote was, because we know that the Falcons are definitely taking a round one edge, I think it's justified just because you're much more likely going to get more of a needle mover in round one than you would get in rounds 2 or 3. And there's a significant drop off from round 1 to 2 and 3. And arguably that's a big reason why the Falcons pass rush hasn't been fixed, because the Falcons have been focusing primarily on rounds 2 and 3 to add those pass rushers. But for you, when doing that research, what were some of the interesting takeaways that you had? And, what is your biggest takeaway in sort of conclusion when it comes to the Falcons 2025 draft plans?
Yeah, the obvious thing that I was expecting was the gap between round 1 and round 2 guys. And that was present. But what took me by surprise was the difference between round 2 and round 3. Statistically, like those edge defenders taken in those 2 rounds, you're basically getting almost the exact same result, which is going to be, maybe around 2 to 3 sacks, sub 20 pressures total, which is kind of what matters more. And it really kind of highlighted to me, like, the same thing that you walked away with, where I was like, yeah, they need to just invest in one in the first round, because there is a big difference, even in a class that's being marketed as, very deep. The top of this class, in my opinion, is not very deep. So if there is a high caliber pass rusher that comes into, play at whether it's 15 or a trade down, I think it makes a lot of sense for them to pull the trigger this year, because you have to get going on that process early. And the best way to land a top end pass rusher is by drafting one in the first round. Like that's the best, that's the like best odds for you to do it. And the odds are still extremely low.
Yeah. I think that's right. It's not, hey, we'll take a first round edge rusher and the Falcons automatically will have a great pass rush from here to eternity. But it is like, if you want to have a shot, like you have to pull the trigger, I think, on that first round edge rusher. And that's basically been my takeaway through this entire, and I will refuse to acknowledge any other possibility outside of edge rusher round 1. And so I am dooming myself for an epic crash out on, that recap episode come Thursday night, April 24th, as it stands right now. But again, I will continue to die on that hill all day long. But when we look at some of these edge rushers that potentially could be available, and this is one of the difficult things about this particular draft class, because we don't really know how the board is going to fall. Like there's a scenario where the Falcons are picking at 15 and they could get the second edge rusher off the board. And there's also a scenario where they're picking at 15 and they might have to settle for like the sixth edge rusher off the board. But I'm curious, when you look at this crop of players, obviously outside of Abdul Carter of Penn State, is there any one of these guys that stands out to you that you feel like, okay, these guys have the higher floors that could, in theory, come in and perform above the average in terms of what you expect out of a round one pass rusher, which is around 5 sacks and 30-35 pressures?
Yeah. The guy that comes to mind that I think when I think floor, and this might go against what some people believe, but that's Mykel Williams. And the reason I say him is because he is somebody that gives them 3-down ability. And that is like critical just for him to be able to get on the field so he can get the reps he needs so that they can, you earn the right to rush the passer, right? So he gets to stay out there on those downs and he gets to develop, I think, in a more natural environment and way if he were to come here. So the pass rush numbers, I know that he's one of the guys who it's like Shemar Stewart, where you don't really see, this great productivity. He has I think a decent win rate, but it's definitely, a ceiling projection, but he has the measurables and traits that translate well to the league. And so when you're betting on a guy who, hasn't maybe hit that ceiling yet, you at least want to make sure that he has the, Terry's RAS score, that he has those certain marks where you're like, okay, these players ultimately end up having a better shot at succeeding when they get drafted and brought into the league at the next level. So he's somebody that I would really like for them. And in the same way, I feel that about Shemar Stewart. I think he's another guy where, again, the 3-down versatility abilities, is really what I'm looking at when I'm trying to think about who can have the most impact for them as an edge rusher at that first pick.
Okay. Well, you mentioned Mykel Williams, you mentioned Shemar Stewart in positive ways here on today's Locked On Falcons, a rarity when it comes to talking about draft prospects in this year's draft class. And so, I want to keep the positivity train going here on the pod, Trey, and look at, a couple more prospects that you have your eyes on that you would be, happy. Someone's got to be happy on the show if the Falcons draft one of these players. And we'll get into some of those guys as we continue today's Locked On Falcons. Now, since the NBA playoffs are almost here, FanDuel is going to hook you up and give new customers an incredible way to get in on the playoff action, because right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your first bet wins. And we love how FanDuel makes betting on the NBA playoffs so much easier, whether you're betting on the Atlanta Hawks to win their play-in game, whether you're looking into the player props in individual games from three-pointers to steals. Trae Young's hitting them threes. Dyson Daniels is getting them steals. You can find your favorite player props, and after the game tips off, you can even combine those props into a same game parlay for your chance to win big. So don't miss out on this playoff action by heading over to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. So as I've said, I spend all my time on this podcast poking holes into various prospects. What can I say? A, I'm a hater, and B, I don't know if it's a great draft class, particularly at the top of the draft. But, one of my goals over the next 2+ weeks now, as we gear up for this draft, is to have people on this podcast that will actually say nice things about some of these prospects on the pod for once. So when we talk about a couple of guys that you have sort of circled as guys that you're fans of, that you would sit here and say, yes, the Falcons absolutely nailed it. Terry, you did an incredible job. So, give me your sales pitch for a couple of those guys.
CJ West out of Indiana. This is probably of all of my shrine propaganda that I've been walking out with since that week. CJ West is probably, I think, the most valid. He's like an actual replacement. I think when people talk about all these guys that are, potential Grady Jarrett replacements, he's the one in my mind that actually has, I think, the ability to kind of be that player. But I honestly think he would succeed much more doing traditional nose work than kind of Grady did. Grady was really good at doing the, just kind of penetrating, shoot the gap technique stuff. And West can do that for you, but I think he offers you real ability on rundowns as a nose tackle. He tested a lot better at the combine than I think people were expecting. He moves really well on film. He has the knee drop technique. He's able to do all the fun stuff that guys like to highlight when they're going through and looking at things. He's a little bit shorter. He doesn't really have great length, and that's kind of like, his downfall. But he has, what I think you need to have if you're that player, which is what Grady had, which is he has the strength and the play strength to succeed at the next level. He's perfect if you have a third-round pick. It's not a guy that I like at 46. If the Falcons can accumulate some draft picks, he's somebody that, I would really like for them to grab. With a potential third or fourth or whatever they're able to squeeze out of another team.
Who else is on your list?
So I know you talked about Barron the other day. I really like his teammate Andrew Mukuba. I think that Mukuba has, not the, I think, lockdown ability in the slot that you would see from Barron, but I think that Mukuba can still do a lot of work. For you there. He's tenacious. He's not the biggest guy, but when you watch him on film, he has no problem crashing down into the box, playing the run. He's just a really physical player. He has good range. He is somebody that could be moved around in a very versatile way, which that kind of seems what, the Falcons are after. I don't think they necessarily want a traditional slot cornerback because run defense, in my opinion, when they were in nickel was an issue from the slot at times. I thought Alfred was okay, but it just still wasn't at the level that I think it needs to be if they want to be in nickel as much as they were last year. Maybe that changes, so TBD, but he's a guy that I think offers you a lot in the secondary that I would like for them to, potentially grab. Like if that's I would honestly be fine with him at 46. I think he's a top 50 player in this class.
Yeah, I actually like Mukuba more than I like Nicky Manwari. So I know that's a spicy take based off of how most people rate Nicky Manwari as like a top 20 talent, and Mukuba more like a borderline top 100 talent. But I actually like him a lot more than that guy. But so I'm a fan.
His tape is better. Like if you're looking at who can play the position better, I agree with you. There's Manwari's not there, and it is funny. I think at this point we have seen a little bit of a decline on Eamon Ward. I think PFF has him down at pretty far down on their big board now.
Yeah, I think I just looked at it because I was compiling a consensus board, and I think they just moved him down from to 70 or something.
It's like 70. Yeah, it's pretty low. So I think the Raz card is nice, but the film never really lined up with it.
Yeah. You're betting on development with Eamon Ward more so than and I think that's the selling point on a guy like Mukuba, where the floor I think is pretty high. Maybe he doesn't have the higher ceiling just because the physical traits aren't quite what you would ideally want with the size and the weight and all that stuff. But I think he can be a plug and play player that has that versatility that you're talking about. But is there another name on your list?
Yeah. So the Falcons shared a video today of Chris Lindstrom. I think he was squatting 605 pounds. He's just getting ready for his first team All-Pro season that's coming his way this year. But I noticed in the video that it looked like he was working out with Drew Kendall, and because this is I'm able to use Instagram, I confirmed it was Drew Kendall, and so it made a lot of sense. Two BC guys. Alec must have missed the invite. I don't know. Just gotta leave your little brother at home. Classic older brother shenanigans there, but Kendall is somebody that I actually do like as a fit for the team. I think that I don't know if he would be ready to supplant Nuzil in his first year, but when you look at his film, he's got really good feet. They do a lot of fun stuff with him, kind of pulling him in the run game. I would describe him as an efficient blocker. He understands leverage and blocking angles very well. He's not super strong. He reminds me a lot of kind of like maybe like rookie Dahlman. I don't know if he will be able to become the road grader Dahlman was, but I think that he'd be able to work in our zone attack. But he's a guy that I think you could legitimately get him, like with maybe even with one of those 7th round picks. Like I don't know. Whenever I hear that a class is weak, it usually makes me feel like there's going to be overdrafting, not that there's going to just be these guys that fall to where they should go in a normal year. So he's somebody that might, if you had a 6th round pick, it'd be great. You could definitely get him in the 6th round, I think. But it is what it is. But he's another guy that I think would make a lot of sense for us.
I'm shocked that you promoted a center here and you weren't promoting Thomas Perry, the Shrine Bowl guy, here on the show. That was I guess you got a quota on only one Shrine Bowl guy per episode or something.
Hey man, I've got some Ben Saul's takes for you. So that's that's the second Shrine guy that I was waiting to tell you about here. That I think, hey, I know we got Lenny Craig, but what's one more? What's one more kicker? Just got to be ready.
Unprecedented 3-way kicker
everybody
competition.
Wanted last year. Last year, I remember. Why isn't there a succession plan for kicker on the roster already? What? Now they have to go look for scraps. This is terrible management by Terry. So Terry's just doing what people ask for.
Okay. So Ben Saul's the pit kicker. You're in favor of a 3-way kicker competition this summer?
Yeah, and Ben Saul's is a lefty, so I'm just, it really just adds something different, to the competition just for fun. Like, let's change the entire setup for one guy. This is going to be this just seems like, something that the Falcons could get behind, where they're just like, nobody else is doing this in the league. We're just thinking ahead.
Yeah. I mean, you might even bring a second punter in just to hold for Ben Saul's in practice, during training camp, right?
Well, let's not get too crazy.
Okay.
Maybe if we could find like a long snapper punter combo here, the more you can do, right? Like it's all about these versatile players. So we got to get something out of our specialists.
Yes, clearly special teams is the prize, that the thing that the Falcons really are expecting to make a big leap this year, way more than the defense. And the Falcons are a big believer that it takes all 3 phases, or I guess they're more a big believer that the 2 most important phases are offense and special teams at this point. But again, that's all going to change in the draft, because they're going to definitely take a pass rusher in round 1. But Tre'Shon, anybody else that you want to throw out there and talk positively about for once on this podcast?
Man, it's tough. I'm trying to think of corners. I don't really want to. The ones I like should all be gone by the time we actually take corner, because, like you said, we're going pass rush. I'll talk about a linebacker, and this one's tough because it's like I'm trying to figure out what's Ulbrich going to want, and I still feel like just more speed. I think Mondon is your 7th round UGA player of the year. The kid can go. He's fast. He just needs to I think the game is a little quick for him sometimes, but if he can catch up mentally, then I think the sky's the limit for him. And again, I think that he's somebody that they can actually get on day 3. And what's one more will linebacker, right? What's one more at this point? We'll just kick Troy over to Mike when they need to use Caden in those, blitz situations, whatever, and we'll make it work.
Okay. Well, this draft class is loaded with the 7th round Georgia guys, whether it's Warren Brinson or Nazir Stackhouse, Dan Jackson, Smail Mondon. I'm sure there's a couple of, Arian Smith, who were talking about, getting that punt gunner out there. No. So there's a lot of options for the Falcons with those 2 7th round picks that we know are definitely going to be Georgia players moving forward. So we will see on that. Appreciate you, Tre'Shon, for saying some positive things about prospects for once on this podcast. I had, of course, to inject my snark into there, because we just cannot be that praising of players, future Falcons on this podcast. But one position that you did not discuss was the offensive tackle position. And I've been very dismissive of the idea that the Falcons are going to legitimately use one of their premium picks in those first couple of rounds on an offensive tackle. And maybe, just maybe, like, Terry's scheming up something, and we'll talk about whether or not all this interest in some of these offensive tackles is just a smokescreen as we wrap up today's Locked On Falcons. Now, of course, you have heard of Chewy because they have everything you need to keep your pet happy and healthy. Whether you're shopping for food, treats, or even pet healthcare, Chewy's going to make it fast, easy, and affordable with over 100,000 products for your favorite brands. Chewy has everything your pet needs, from food to treats, toys, beds, grooming. It's not just for dogs and cats. You can get supplies for birds, fish, reptiles, small pets, llamas, everything under the table, under the sun for you at Chewy. And then, of course, you can have all of those things ship straight to your door with automatic deliveries with their auto ship feature, whether you're setting up food treats or any other essentials, so that you never run out and you can easily change and cancel at any time. Chewy has everything you need to keep your pet happy and healthy. And right now you can save $20 on your first order and get free shipping by going to chewy.com or clicking the link in the description below. Save $20 on your first order with free shipping by clicking the link in the description. Minimum purchase required. New customers only. Terms and conditions apply. See site for complete details. So the Atlanta Falcons have been connected to 2 first-round offensive tackles, Kelvin Banks Jr. out of Texas, Josh Conerly Jr. out of Oregon. I'm sure there's probably some other guys that I don't care about because, you know me, I'm a hater. But that has prompted a lot of speculation as of late that their interest in taking a tackle early is serious. I've questioned it, talked about earlier this week on the podcast that I don't think people should put that much stock in who the Falcons are linked to from a draft interest standpoint, particularly in the Fontenot era where it hasn't been as strong a correlation there as it was in the Thomas Dimitroff era. I know you did a mock draft on Monday, posting it on Twitter, where you had the Falcons trading back to pick 25 with the Houston Texans and taking a safety, but a Georgia safety in Malachi Starks. How dare you? But, it got me thinking that maybe, just maybe, the Falcons are showing interest in these offensive tackles as a way to sort of lure a team like Houston, who has a very obvious need at that left tackle position after trading Laramie Tunsil this offseason, to potentially trade up into round 1 to make sure that they get ahead of a team like the Falcons, who may be in the market for one of those left tackles. So I'm curious, from your perspective, am I just in denial over the Falcons having legit interest in an offensive tackle, or do you think this is a plausible theory?
No, I think it's a pretty plausible theory. And, I think it goes deeper than just the guys they've met with. They sent the O-line staff to the combine to do the drills. So it feels like they're really selling it, that like they're looking seriously at the group. But I'm with you. It definitely seems like the end game here is to get a team like Houston to at least pick up the phone to say, hey, are you, get some conversations started about what the plans are, if they're looking to move, if they could strike a deal. And I think you're on the right track there.
Okay. So you're not expecting the Falcons to pull the trigger on a tackle early in this draft?
I want the Falcons to trade down. I want them to trade down and take an edge. But as soon as they decide to trade down, that's really when I think I'm going to start sweating, because I could definitely see them taking a tackle. I could definitely see them taking, a skill position like wide receiver or something like that. So, if you ask me if I had to say, is there zero chance? There's always a chance. There's always a chance.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's fair. Me and my constant negativity, I'm just like, oh, they're going to take an offensive tackle in round 1. They're going to take a run plugging nose tackle in round 2. And that's just how the Falcons are going to do it. But I'm curious, when you mentioned how they sent offensive line coaches, both of their offensive line coach, Dwayne Ledford, and assistant O-line coach, Sean Flaherty, to the combine to work out the guys on the field. All these indications show that the Falcons are interested in drafting an offensive lineman. You've mentioned a center, offensive tackle, I think is a need. I think it makes sense for the Falcons to bolster their depth in this draft class. But the part I struggle with, Trey, is they spent a bunch of money is relative, but they gave Kyle Hinton a big raise. They re-signed Brandon Parker. They bring back Storm Norton, which I don't think was a shocker at that point. They bring back Elijah Wilkinson. They have Javon Gwynn and all that. So it feels like their O-line room, while not great, is already full. And so, are they going to be serious about adding to those positions? So I'm just curious, where do you sort of see the expectations for this team's draft plans along the offensive line, whether it's a tackle, center, or elsewhere?
Yeah, I thought it was very interesting that as soon as it was like Drew Dahlman was gone, we locked up everybody else on the offensive line. And I think them locking up both, I knew Norton was expected, but I wasn't expecting them to lock up both of the depth tackles. And that kind of, I think, to me, signals that maybe they are the only spot that would make sense for them based on how they've moved would be, interior, in my opinion. I know that Hinton did get the raise, and so he is somebody that, I don't know what maybe they do think that could be, Nuzil's backup or something like that. But I do believe that they're taking a hard look at this class top to bottom. They could be trying to just maybe, get an understanding of, what's coming into the league now. And maybe they've already done work, on next year's group, and they just want to confirm as much as they can. Because they've looked at guys like Logan Brown from Kansas. Like, I feel like they've looked at, kind of people that they could look at all over. They could draft, in a multitude of spots. So I want to believe that center is the move, but again, this tackle class has been described as weak, but there's guys like Ursary and other players that would make sense for them that are developmental pieces like Chase Lunt, that they could legitimately take a shot at, after day 2.
Yeah. I think, I've been pushing for the Falcons draft tackle for 2 years. And so I certainly think tackle is a need, but it just feels like on the list of priorities, it's to me, it's not a need. It's more of like the top want, at this point, where it's just like, unless they can trade back and get more picks, it does feel like they're going to have to spurn a more pressing need at a position if they're going to put, because basically, like, if you don't draft a tackle in like the first 3 or 4 rounds, like the chances of that guy turning into anything more than just a career backup is pretty low. And so like that means you got to use one of your premium picks on, and if you use one of your premium picks on an offensive tackle or center, that's one less player that is potential day 1 starter for you on the defensive side of the ball. So that's where I kind of struggle with it. And so if they can entice a team like Houston to trade up, right, where the move, I don't know, I can't recall what your mock had, but I know looking at various draft charts, like you could presumably get maybe Houston's 2nd round pick to go.
It was like their 2nd and their 4th, or their 2nd and their 5th is what the deal was in the trade.
Okay. So yeah, like I feel like, that type of trade back would certainly change the math on whether or not the Falcons have the quote unquote flexibility to take a tackle. But we'll just sort of have to see on that front. Maybe Trey, Terry Fontenot's playing 4D chess with all these workouts and player visits.
One can only hope. He's playing something. We'll figure out what the game is in a couple weeks.
So Trey, appreciate you coming on, saying some positive things about some players on this draft class, continuing the negativity towards the team itself. We got to keep that thing going. But let the people know some of the things you're working on, where they can find your stuff.
Yeah, just doing some writing over at the Falcoholic still. And then you can pretty much find anything I'm working on at Tre'Shon.io. Throw up some different graphics and other things like that there as well too, that are free to download and whatnot. So you can just check it out if you like. If not, that's okay too.
Okay. Very nonchalant plug there. Appreciate that. So we will be back tomorrow here on Locked On Falcons. Continue to subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll probably talk again. We'll see what happens in the next 24 hours. Maybe the Falcons will re-sign another, low-key free agent that we can talk about. But more than likely, I think we'll probably take a look at some of these edge rushers and sort of talk positively about what these guys could actually bring and why the Falcons may covet some of these guys in the draft. So that may be in store for you on tomorrow's Locked On Falcons. In the meantime, look ahead to Locked On NFL Draft. I know they just did a recent episode looking at some of the edge rushers, so go check that out. Locked On NFL Draft is all part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.